Welcome to ASEAN People Speak, Season 3. I'm Regine Jessica Abuel, your host for this podcast. For our second episode, we will be joined by a distinguished expert in information, communications, and technology for development and internet governance. He will share with us his knowledge on the effects of technological advancements on privacy rights. For over 20 years, he has investigated the impacts of the Network Information Society on human development in Southeast Asia. He is currently the executive director of Engage Media, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes digital rights, open and secure technology, and social issue documentary. He has worked with the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP, in Malaysia and Thailand. As an author and editor, he has contributed to numerous UN publications, including ICT policies and e-strategies in the Asia Pacific. Everyone, let us welcome Mr. Pat Sayo. Hi, Pat.
Hi, Reg. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Session.
Thank you very much also for joining us. And it is our privilege and our honor to have you with us for the second episode of the third season in ASEAN People Speak. May we ask where you are right now? How are you there?
Thank you very much. I'm in Busan, South Korea, having moved here just a few months ago. Last year, I was a digital nomad in Thailand, the Philippines, Indonesia.
Wow.
Laos.
That's very nice. So you are very much everywhere in Asia, in Southeast Asia, and probably around the world too. So we're happy that you are with us tonight or today. And I guess to start off our episode, let us talk about artificial intelligence. So AI. Can you tell us about artificial intelligence in ASEAN, Pat, and probably what you think about its development throughout the years and its trajectory also?
Sure, thanks. I think the first thing we have to make note of is what do we mean by artificial intelligence? Right now, there is incredible hype around that term, and it's quite vague and ambiguous right now. Very much, as you said in my introduction, it's almost 3 decades in what is information communications technology, and then the advent of the internet. And that time, the adoption of that technology, there was vague notions of what cyberspace is. I think AI is even more vague term. So perhaps it's good to start there. And I tend to follow Kai-Fu Lee's category of AI is first there's internet AI, business AI, perception AI, and autonomous AI. Internet AI is what I think is getting the most hype at the moment with generative AI, things like Open AI's ChatGPT, for example. These are systems, large language systems, and also visualization, computer vision systems. But there's a great array of AI. And at the moment, there is great enthusiasm in ASEAN to adopt AI and to regulate AI, particularly in countries where there is incentive around AI, potential AI trade that is projected to be in the billions in the future. These countries, mostly you're looking at Singapore, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam that are leading. I'm originally from Laos, and certainly in the whole spectrum of readiness, Laos is at the bottom, and you'd say Singapore is at the top of that.
That's
in
true.
terms of, sorry.
I agree. Sorry, I just recalled that some ASEAN countries actually are moving towards digitalizing information. I mean, not just collecting, but digitalizing information and probably doing transactions now electronically. And AI has been very helpful. At this stage, some developing countries are adjusting to it or gearing themselves towards that aspect, but other developed countries are already, how should I say it? They've already established themselves in this aspect. So can you tell us more about this development? How has this AI or specifically digitalizing information or things helped or probably not helped also in the region?
Yeah, thanks. I think the one way to think about it is the Bergman Center of Internet Societies talking about dimensions in which there are positive and negative benefits in both digitization and the adoption of artificial intelligence. And the three main dimensions or factors would be quality of training data, one, the second is
Mhm.
systems design, and three, the sort of complex interactions of these systems that results in predictable and unpredictable outcomes. So, given those three aspects, again, you have on the head of the curve would be the likes of Singapore, where the infrastructure is already, as you said, digitization is well into the decades. And not only that, you have a populace that is friendly to the English speaking language. And then on the
Mhm,
other
yes.
end, you have Laos, where I spent my good year last year there, where the roads infrastructure is not even there. So you, on the one hand, Singapore is ready for autonomous driving machines, and that requires a whole spectrum of digitization. And I think it's very much linked to the topic of surveillance. There's a level of
Mm.
tracking that is required for cars to drive themselves in Singapore, but you also trade off in civil liberties in that. And then you have the other spectrum of ASEAN, Laos and Myanmar. Myanmar is in conflict at the moment, so there's really no
Yes.
discussion there. But Laos, where the quality of data for training is low, there is no system design. There is the lack of engineers in that situation.
Mm.
And if you talk about digitization that you mentioned there, it really is about readiness. I'll give you an example, I suppose, when we're talking, since we're talking about rights here and human rights in the context of digitization, datification, the adoption of artificial intelligence. I'll give you a phrase that I heard recently or translated on Facebook. My sister in Laos sent a message, and a phrase was translated: three toilets in a cabinet. That
Mhm.
means nothing, and I can't even give you the Lao translation because it's gibberish. Now,
Okay.
this is Facebook's algorithms trying to translate
Mm.
the Lao phrase. So on the one spectrum, Singapore and the US and most of Europe and my adopted country, Canada, you have undergraduate students who have the benefit of an open AI chat GPT helping them
Yes.
write essays. Meanwhile, Facebook can't even do a translation of a Lao phrase. So within that
Yeah.
spectrum, you have great benefits, and it's about knowledge economy, and then you have not so great benefits. I mean, it's really catch up. And I just gave you an example where it's utter gibberish. So it's not helpful
Yes.
at all. So if we talk about human rights, let's consider the right to language. In this case, there's a positive benefits for adoption of AI, digitization, and ICT technologies in general. If you are an English-speaking person,
Yes.
person, in the 90s, Malaysia, I think, took a lead in the adoption, largely because it had a huge population of English-speaking knowledge workers. Mahathir and company with the multi-super corridor initiative was banking on the back office services of Malaysia. Similarly, that's the advantage in AI adoption, digitization that Southeast Asian countries have who are English speaking. Now, on the other end, if you're not
English
English
speaking.
speaking or
Yes.
adopt the language, you're behind. No matter how much you adopt the technologies, the same thing goes for
Yeah.
roots is language. So, from a human rights perspective, never mind talking about surveillance, but to benefit from such technologies requires a cultural system, a
Mhm.
social cultural education system that is already ready for these technologies. And
Yeah.
in ASEAN, there's a whole spectrum. Again, I would put Singapore ahead, whereas Myanmar and Laos near the end. And then somewhere in between, you have the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam.
Mm. The other countries in between, yeah. I like that you mentioned that, and it's very significant actually, the disparity and the difference, the big difference. And I appreciate that you've mentioned with the language alone, English language alone, you can see how other countries are able to adapt and others cannot really adapt to it right away because the language itself is a barrier.
Mhm.
But if I may, you've mentioned a while ago surveillance pet, and can we try to elaborate on that? I'd like to ask, how is AI and its massive innovation now affect the security in ASEAN, especially in developing countries? And you've mentioned a while ago that there's a big difference and you have established systems already in developed countries. And how about those countries which are not like Singapore, that are not super advanced in terms of digital technology?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I guess to answer your first part, let me share a story. So recently I went on a road trip before coming back here to Busan. I visited Bangkok, then Kuala Lumpur, then Jakarta. On first in Bangkok, a series of meeting with partners, but ultimately to Jakarta to work with the Ministry of Communications and IT there. They're considering adopting an AI policy along with an AI strategy. The ministry is charged with talking about ethics and guidelines. This is relevant to what you've mentioned because just even last few days, Reuters put out a news that they received confidential information from ASEAN that hinted at regulating AI within the region that is a bit more business friendly, to use Reuters words. Because right now, what's happening in the European Union and in the US, not so much in China, but not having quite a global influence, is there's a race towards developing umbrella AI governance acts or rules that will allow AI industries that are cross-border to do business. And I'm going to link to what you're asking previously, because during that trip to visit the ministry to talk about their AI regulations and ethics, I went through Kuala Lumpur's KLIA airport, and there was a kiosk for you to be able to take facial recognition. So for the convenience of not having to go through passport immigration or whatever line up of queues, I could sign up for this process, in which they can take a picture of my face and then I can pass. So there's a benefit in a sense there, but I also went through several airports in the last couple of weeks, and everywhere I had to give my photograph, my 4 fingerprints,
Yes.
etc. And not only that, every time I landed in Jakarta, KL, Bangkok, I needed to get a SIM card, and every one of them needed my passport, needed my photo, needed my fingerprint.
Information, your personal information.
My private data, in essence, my biometrics, and that's on the rise. I'm old enough to remember when I lived in Kuala Lumpur. You mentioned my CV with UNDP. When I was at UNDP Malaysia, I was able to get my first SIM card in Malaysia without any ID. It was literally going to a kiosk getting it. Now that's somewhat years ago, and that's changed. So we've accepted now in the region a level of data tracking or giving up our biometrics for certain conveniences. Now, can I do without a mobile phone? No. But I eventually signed up for face tracking so I can pass through queues. I might. But the fact of the matter is those systems are already there. And so with governments trying to now regulate, it's almost doing catch up to the technology that's already there and the market that is already there. So you're talking about adoption of surveillance technologies. One of the reasons why AI policies have become very popular is if you have policies that interoperate nationally, it allows for the US, allows for China to sell surveillance equipment. So the facial recognition kiosk that I mentioned is an example of that. And so ASEAN right now is a fairly big market for surveillance technologies, and facial recognition is the number one technology that's being sold, and also tech software that is allowed to be able to detect patterns. Now, this is crucial in that these practices already happen, but civil society and laws are not catching up to protect civil liberties. This is especially crucial in our region where there's places of conflict. In Myanmar, for example, is especially important when elections are coming to play. Identify people. And it's especially going to be very important because now we live in a time of post-truth and
Mm-hmm.
disinformation that's automated. And so the countering of that is increased surveillance, increased tracking. And we just passed, sorry to ramble on, but final point. We just went
No worries.
we just went through the pandemic. We're not actually through it. We're still living
Yes. Mm-hmm.
in the sense that I think we've now accepted tracking of all sorts. I enter in Bangkok, if I go to a ubiquitous 7-Eleven, the first thing that you'll see is a temperature measure of me. Now, this is a small example, an example of who owns that data. Do I own that data? That's my body giving that temperature reading. And
Yeah.
that data, is it regulated? Is not. And so the border example is one, but at a national level, everybody is now in the business of data tracking. Private sector,
Yes.
public sector, civilians with citizens to each other. So norms are being developed, but laws are late to both tech adoption and market adoption in the case of surveillance technology. So
I like that you pointed that out because actually I wanted to connect it with what happened to us during the pandemic that, we actually were freely giving our information, our personal data to systems or to tracking devices just so they can be assured that we're all vaccinated or we're not infected by the virus. And this in itself poses a danger, a risk to our security personally, and also in terms of keeping the data that is being collected. And on that note, I know you've already mentioned this, but I want us to emphasize, I guess, on this topic. What are the challenges then in implementing data protection regulations across the ASEAN region? A while ago, you've mentioned that there is a movement to regulate AI in the ASEAN. And do you think there are already successful initiatives or probably best practices or done in the ASEAN countries that could demonstrate the effective protection of privacy rights amidst technological advancements?
Yeah, I think globally there is already good practice in the general data protection regulation that the EU puts out and to which cross-border jurisdictions comply to. I think in ASEAN, again, you're pointing to more, lack of a better term, pro-democracy countries like Singapore that rule of law is in place. The risk of data protection laws that are being put in place where government regimes don't accept the law applying to them. So that's where you have a situation. Similarly, you have with regulating, for example, disinformation. Now, a civil society organization like Engage Media, we tread a very fine line because on the one hand, we want higher data protection for the individual, etc., but we don't want states to be above that law. And there are certain countries where political will says that, fine, we'll have data protection, but it's for the citizenry. It doesn't apply to, say, monarchies. It doesn't apply to the state. It doesn't apply to political powers. And not only that, laws like data protection or even laws that are aimed at regulating content, say disinformation. If you look at now the convergence of telecommunication and data, so information and news becomes a form of data. Regulating that, we are an organization that is for free speech. At the same time, the right for privacy. And we don't want to be able to pit these two against each other, free speech and so it's a careful dance. Same thing with, as I said, the sort of regulating disinformation is wanting to promote data protection because it can be used the other way around, where certain governments have used
certain statements or information, and it could already mean something else. We don't want it to appear as something to be on the other end. We don't want it to be too extreme, right? And I caught something that you said a while ago. You want to have a careful dance or a balance between these two. And I appreciate that you've mentioned that because I want to relate it now to how AI now and technology and all the surveillance and security that we've talked about, how does this then affect individuals' privacy. I mean, we're not just talking about people or organizations who are advocating for freedom of speech or certain advocacies. I want to ask now then, how does this affect individuals or citizens under one certain state, and how can ASEAN countries respond to these things, or how can they try to strike a balance, or as you would say, a careful dance between the freedom of speech and also regulating certain things digitally?
So right now there is a great emphasis and investments actually on talking about AI policy development and AI ethics. A lot of big giant tech is investing in AI ethics research, for example. There are numerous guidelines, including UNESCO's guideline, and people signing up on that. And so there's a rush to talk about governing AI. At the beginning of this podcast, I mentioned that AI is so vague right now. So you necessarily then reduce to language of values. We cherish openness, we cherish safety. This is all fine, but it's hard to think about how that's operationalized. And as I mentioned, Reuters just mentioned that there is going to be an ASEAN framework or guideline around AI governance that will not necessarily, according to Reuters anyways, not necessarily adopt the EU's language around risks. High level risk and unacceptable risk. Now that impacts individual rights, individuals immensely. Now going back to the point about why are we adopting this, for a civil society organization like ours that is focused on human rights, we still feel like data protection is the front line. So if you're talking about AI policy or ethics, you necessarily bypass data protection, because for the adoption of AI, you require a lot of data collection, a lot of data sets, etc., and for that to be effective. And so, in my view, the discussion around AI governance ethics necessarily bypasses that front line. And as an organization dealing with human rights and data protection and right to privacy, we want to put that front line back on to say, data protection, data governance is first. In ASEAN, we have a terrible record of that. Our rankings globally are low. If you look at Freedom House's even current assessment of the region, internet freedom is quite low here. So talking about AI governance is right now an opportunity to talk about proper data protection individual and how that applies at the very, very individual level. We're going to soon adopt technology that is biased by design, biased to the global north, to language, as we mentioned earlier, but also skin color, religion, etc. So these biases will be in the system. And not only that, the quality of data that we have in the region, while massive, has its biases again that will affect minority groups, sexual minorities, religious minorities, etc., in unintended ways. I'm unable to speak about those because by very nature they're unpredictable. But that's the situation. So what we think civil society can do at the moment is to emphasize that front line. While we are talking about artificial intelligence governance, let's get the house clean around data governance first. Data protection laws, right to access information, right to privacy online, etc. Get that in order first, if not at the same time as getting AI governance in place. And in terms of what governments can do is to have that focus again. ASEAN has a framework for data government. Let's put investments in talking about that first before talking about this other
aspects of it. Like the economic side and the other things. Thank you so much. I learned a lot of things, Pat, from you today. And honestly, I want to, you've mentioned a lot of things or concepts as well, but I want to emphasize on that data protection is first. And Although we recognize that data governance is a must now, especially with the emergence of AI and advancement of technologies in ASEAN countries, it still is important to that data protection goes side by side with data
Mm,
governance,
mm,
because the right to access, the right to privacy, and all other fundamental basic human rights should also come together when we talk about developments and advancements, especially when it comes to data governance. I think that's all for today. Unless, Pet, do you want to probably just a few words, some things that you want to leave behind with our listeners as we are about to close the program?
yeah, yeah. I just the thought that you mentioned about that, the emphasis around how we are data subjects or data citizens. I think it's the weakest of our society that are most susceptible. I'm talking about people who are data illiterate in the sense
Yeah.
of using technology without the having the awareness of how data is being used. I was talking about to you about the conveniences. I'm willing to give those things up in certain aspects, but imagine those who are not having the power to do so and then being
Yeah.
discriminated or biased against. And I'm thinking about the future, people who are not born yet, who are
Yes.
necessarily thrown into these norms, into these policies, into an environment where they have little power. So we need to get it right now for not only the marginalized, but for future generations.
Yeah. Well, I think we can end on that note. Thank you so much, Pet, for all your insights and the things that you have shared today for our episode. That's all for today for ASEAN People Speak. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. And thank you so much, Pet, for joining us today. Would you like to promote your social media account or maybe website or your organization? Any publications or upcoming projects?
Yeah, sure. Please visit our website at engagedmedia.org. That is our main site to learn about our work in digital rights and open secure technology. But also visit cinemata.org. That's cinemata.org. It's a platform, open secure platform for filmmakers who are dealing with not only
Mm.
digital rights, but climate justice and other social issues. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk, Reg. I've been
Thank
honored and
you. We
privileged.
are equally honored and privileged as well to have you with us, Pet. Thank you so much again. Join us again next week. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on Spotify to stay updated and never miss an episode. You can also stay connected with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by following at WGSCNHRMEC. And you can also visit our website at ASEANHRMEC.org. This has been a very well and a very, very, very much informed episode of ASEAN People Speak Season 3. Again, I am Reg, your host. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged. Bye. Engaged Media combines video, technology, knowledge, and networks, which supports Asia Pacific and global change makers advocating for human rights, democracy, and the environment. Prior to Engaged Media, our guest was based in New Delhi and was a senior program officer for the International Development Research Center, or IDRC. Prior to IDRC's regional office in New Delhi,